Blonde is the newest Netflix film about Marilyn Monroe, arguably the most beautiful woman to have ever walked this earth, and I would probably say the most famous actress to have ever graced Hollywood. And now she has a movie on Netflix. Hey guys, my name is Brandon, aka the BrandoCritic. Thank you guys so much for being here today. I really do appreciate it. And today, I'm gonna give you my honest, no BS, non-spoiler review for Blonde and tell you if it's worth a watch. Now, before we get started, guys, just to let you know, this is only my own personal opinion. Every single review of every single movie ever is just opinion. So if you guys think the same or differently, let me know your thoughts of Blonde down in the comment section down below. Let's begin. So, this movie is directed by Andrew Dominik, who directed the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. Never seen it, let me know if it's worth watching. And of course, this story is about the rise and fall, so to speak, of Marilyn Monroe, starring Ana de Armas. Now, is this movie worth a watch? Well, if you look at Rotten Tomatoes, it's probably 50-50 still. It's like 53%, so it's like right down the middle. And it's gonna be either one or the other, right? You're either gonna really enjoy this movie or it's gonna be just way too artsy fartsy, way too slow, way too boring. And unfortunately, I'm in that camp. This movie, it has some great moments in it. And I do see that there is a vision for this story. It's not just like really sloppily put together. But in my own honest personal opinion, I think you can skip Blonde. I wasn't too impressed with it. I thought this movie was very, very slow, got a little pretentious at points, and it was not streamlined enough to my liking. It's just my own personal opinion, guys, right? And like, yeah, this movie is 3 hours long, almost 3 hours long. I think this movie could have been an hour and a half, really. So it's like watching two mediocre movies slapped onto each other. It was not a very enjoyable experience, I will tell you. Now, I gotta be honest with you guys. I am not the biggest artsy fartsy type of person. I don't necessarily really go for the more hipster-esque films out there. Even in film school, I was more interested in the James Camerons of the world, the Steven Spielbergs, and not the Jim Jarmusch's and the other independent slash maybe a bit more unorthodox filmmaking. There were some people that really were great at making those kind of films, but I was more of the mainstream. Now, just because a movie is mainstream does not mean I'm gonna give it 5 out of 5, right? Like, I definitely can enjoy the abstract imagery or the unorthodox method of filmmaking, but what I really enjoy about that filmmaking is that there's a story underneath it, and all of that abstract imagery and unorthodox filmmaking is really serving the story, whereas I feel like sometimes that can overshadow the story and it's more about a visual experience than telling a story to the audience. And I feel like this movie, Blonde, did jump into that category a couple of times. Now, this isn't your standard biopic. This isn't a Rocket Man, a Bohemian Rhapsody, a Walk the Line. I know those are music biopics. So it's not a simple, here's the childhood, here's the rise to fame, here's the fall from grace, and then here is the untimely death. Spoiler alert, I guess, right? This movie does take a very unorthodox approach. And that was one of my biggest problems with the film. I didn't know necessarily what stage of her life all this stuff was happening. Now, for the most part, it is pretty chronological in terms of you have childhood and then you have death at the end. And of course, you see all of her main relationships, Joe DiMaggio, President Kennedy. But jumping between them is definitely not the most smooth, and it gives the audience, especially me, a bit more confusion because I don't know Marilyn Monroe's life to a T, right? Like, I haven't done my research about Marilyn Monroe before going into this movie. I know the general story about her, who she dated, the movies that she was in, 7-Year Itch, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, Some Like It Hot, and then of course, you know, some of the boyfriends she dated, and then her untimely death to barbiturates. That's all I really know. You kind of see those big pillars, but maneuvering through those pillars, it was not really smooth, and I'm a big proponent of not having to do research before you go see a movie. And I've had that argument with many people, a lot of Star Wars fans. You gotta watch this, you gotta watch this, you gotta read this comic book, you gotta play this video game before you watch this movie. I do not adhere to that thinking at all. I think that a movie should be able to tell you a story that you have no knowledge of, and you can still be invested because it has great characters, a great story, and some kind of emotional investment. Blonde didn't really have that. I think Ana de Armas' performance is the main reason to get really drawn into this film, and that's the reason why I kept watching. But there are many moments in this movie where I'm just going, man, let's get it going. The scene is way too long. I got the purpose of the scene within the first 2 or 3 minutes, and the scene goes on for 15, and it just really draws out the runtime. Now, like I said earlier, this is a very abstract movie where there's a lot of visual imagery, there's a lot of metaphor, there's a lot of allegories, and I do think that some of them are done pretty well. Marilyn Monroe grew up without a father, and she grew up with a very abusive mother. So you see a lot of moments throughout the movie where a father is missing or is absent from her life, and that really affects her life in a very negative way. You see a moment where she talks to President Kennedy, and something's going on the TV. And what's happening on the TV is visually mirroring her own thoughts, her own emotions, and basically what's happening in the scene. Now, that's not a very subtle example, and it does come near the end of the film, but I do like how films sometimes just will show you something visually and not have to explain it to the audience. However, when it gets too visual and you really have to start using your brain to try to connect the dots, sometimes it can get a little bit confusing. Like, for example, there's a lot of aspect ratio changes in this movie. And by all means, I'm for those abstract, I'm using the word abstract a lot in this review, I understand that, but I'm into the different approaches to filmmaking. Like, okay, well, when she's doing this, it's this aspect ratio, then it's gonna be black and white. But honestly, every single time it changed aspect ratios, I would write down, oh, it's because she is being left alone, or it's because she's being lied to, or it's because like she gets on this Marilyn Monroe role, right? Like Norma Jean is her real name, and Marilyn Monroe is just the stage name, aka the persona, aka this way to escape her pains of life. But then they would just go back to this aspect ratio later on in the film, and I would think, wait, no, that can't be it, because that works with that. And then I'm thinking to myself, okay, at the end of the movie, it should be played out for us, meaning I understand why the film decided to do all of these different artistic choices. Maybe it's just me, but I didn't really get that at the end of the film. And some people are really into that. Some people are really into movies that have artistic choices that are not necessarily just explained to the audience or played out for the audience, and it's very art house. It almost gets very experimental. Like there's some sex scenes in the movie, and there's a bunch of waterfalls, like the bed turns into a waterfall, right? So it's visually interesting, but the meaning for it is not necessarily obvious to the audience. And again, this might just be a personal thing. And like I said earlier, the art house type of filmmaking is just generally not for me. Like The Lighthouse, for example, a movie that a lot of people really enjoyed. Unpopular opinion, but that one just really didn't speak to me. And you know, people have often said like, oh, just watch your Transformers, watch your Avengers, you know, like those are the easy movies to watch. Everything's spelled out for you. It's easy to sit back and eat your popcorn. I want to be challenged, but sometimes a film can get a bit too challenging. That's when you start to think to yourself, am I just really not getting this? But then I also think that a filmmaker can be sometimes fighting outside of their weight class, and they might just go too overboard with the visual metaphors and all that stuff. And I even said in the movie once, there was a couple moments where I'm thinking to myself, am I watching 2001: A Space Odyssey or a biopic about Marilyn Monroe? And you think to yourself, you know, if this is a movie about Marilyn Monroe and you see the trailer, this is going to be a movie about how Hollywood and paparazzi and, you know, the American stardom likes to glamorize people and they treat them like a piece of meat. Like, I totally understand that, and they do a really good job in this movie, and it's a very unorthodox way. But again, like, the way that they explore that is really meandering, and this movie did not need to be 3 hours long. I really believe that. I like how this movie showcases the trauma of aborting a child. Now, I'm not getting political on you guys, I'm just saying what's in the movie. The movie does a really good job visually showcasing that. So again, like, there are some moments in this movie that I thought were really powerful, right? Because like I say, if a movie really sucks, then it doesn't give you any emotional response whatsoever. This film did, but there were only little bursts throughout the entire movie. So I guess for an overall rating, I'm gonna give it a 2 out of 5. Ana de Armas was fantastic in this movie, and I did learn a little bit more about Marilyn Monroe as a person, or I guess Norma Jean as a person, and I do like how sometimes the slow pace and the sterile environment and the really uncinematic way of showcasing the film in terms of, you know, the structure and the pacing, like, it's visually entertaining and it's visually beautiful, but a lot of the sterileness really does feel like she's living a nightmare because of the traumas of her past, the traumas and the hardships of being this celebrity that everyone wants to be you, everyone wants to see you, everyone wants a piece of you. Of course, the sexual advancements that she gets from the studio heads, all this stuff makes her life a nightmare. So I do like how the visuals really capture all of that, but man, I just think that this movie has a lot of great ideas that were just not fleshed out in a really cohesive way. And I'm not saying to dumb it down, right? Like, I don't need this movie to be like an Avengers or even like any other biopic, like a Ray or, I don't know, a Chaplin. I just needed this film to be a little bit shorter, a little bit more streamlined, and a bit more easy to comprehend the bigger themes and a bit more of the visual abstractness. So those are my thoughts on Blonde. And like I said before, let me know your thoughts of Blonde down in the comment section down below. What is your favorite Marilyn Monroe movie? And let's just say for the final phrase of the video to say that yes, you have been watching this long, I like writing on lined paper as opposed to typing. That is your phrase. Write that down in the comment section down below so that I know that you've made it this far. Again, these phrases have to be as random as possible so that people can get confused in the comments. And we know that you guys have made it this far. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys again soon. Take care.